Alright, hey guys, this video is going to be looking at pages 14 through 16, and we're going to be in the design part of the research cycle, which is where you spend all the time figuring out, we call it your methodology. How are you actually going to study the thing you came up with in your question cycle? So the first thing you have to decide is whether you're going to do experimental or observational for your study. So we have two scenarios here. I'm going to basically go through page 14 with you, so all you have to do is kind of follow along, fill in your blanks on your packet. So, scenario 1. Jordan is a social networking maniac, and although she prefers Snapchat, she also spends a lot of time using Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. She's curious as to which social networking sites is most preferred for her age group, so she decides to conduct a study. Jordan creates a survey, hands it out to students at her school, and she plans to collect the data from the survey, analyze the results to decide which site is most preferred. Is this experimental or observational? Well, this is definitely going to be, why is it doing that? Experiment or observational. She's not doing anything. She is doing a study. And if you're doing a study, you're not forcing anybody to do anything. Experimental is, I want you to think about like the scientific method. I had one group, I had another group. This group did something. This group didn't do the thing. We compared them and see if there's any change. So when you say, how do you know? You can say observational because she is conducting a survey. She is not actually making any groups do a particular thing. She is observing what's already happened. Okay, so observational studies are great. It's what most of you are doing because you can come up with a big survey, ask people what their opinions are, and then collect all the data on opinions. The problem is that, as we discussed when we did the vocab, is that a lot of people lie or don't want to answer or will put joke answers. So it's observational. You have to do a lot of data and sample to weed out all of that other stuff. So a lot of times experimental data can give you really good data because people can't lie doing the thing they're doing. Like if you were studying how high someone could jump, someone can't fake that. That's just how high they can jump. All right, so scenario 2. Mario loves to listen to music and is convinced that listening to music while taking a test helps him get higher test averages. To prove this, Mario conducts a study amongst his classmates in his AMDM class. With the permission of his teacher, he randomly selects 15 out of 30 students in his class to listen to music during their next test. The remaining 15 students, which we call the control group, are not allowed to listen to music while they take their test. He intends to compare the test scores from each group, hoping to prove his hypothesis that listening to music does increase test scores. Is this experimental or observational? Well, you know that this is going to be experimental. How do you know? He has two different groups. One group receives a treatment, and another group does not. The two groups are compared. So you can still compare groups in an observational study. Like you could compare what the men said to what the women said, but you're not forcing one gender to do something and one gender to do the other, unless you're doing that in experimental and you're studying it there. Okay. Number 3, give an example of an observational and experimental. This is where you would come up with something. So I want you to think of an example of observational, experimental. Maybe the observational is what you're studying for your project. And then think of what you could do for an experimental study and write that in. Okay, so the next ones are still going to focus on a little bit of vocab. Number 4, a variable of interest is what the researcher is studying. In the Mythbusters episode, the variable of interest was pain tolerance. That's what they were concerned about. The variable of interest was not ice. They don't care about ice. They cared about whether or not you could withstand the ice. So, note that if a group did better or worse was not what was being tested. So what was the variable of interest in scenario 1? Well, what did she care about in scenario 1? Social networking sites. Not like men or women or who, just who's using what. Variable of interest in scenario 2 is not the music. A lot of people think it's the music. The music is what you're doing. The thing they care about is test scores. And what he's trying to do to increase the test scores is music. What are the variables of interest for number 3? Well, that depends what you wrote, so that'll be different for everybody. All right, and number 7, in experimental studies, there's also a treatment. So the treatment is different than your variable of interest. The treatment is something that the researcher does or adds to the sample. So observational studies do not have a treatment. You're not doing anything in an observation. But in Mythbusters, the treatment was the ice bath. So in scenario 2, which is the one with Mario, what was the treatment? Music. So, to make sure we understand this difference is that his question, his hypothesis, is about if music affects test grades. So his variable of interest, the thing he's interested in, is test grades, and his treatment is music. He wants to see if the music affects the tests. He also could have the same opinion with like hot Cheetos. Does eating hot Cheetos increase test grades? In that case, your treatment would be hot Cheetos, but he's looking at music. And then number 8, what's the treatment in your experimental sample? Well, that just depends what your experimental sample is. Okay, so going to page 15, for each one of these, you are going to answer questions A through E. So if it's observational or experimental, what the variable of interest is. If it's experimental, what were the treatments and how did they decide who got them? One advantage to this testing method, not the results, but the testing method itself, and one disadvantage to the testing method. Again, not the results, not if they would do better or not, but the design itself. I'm going to do one of them. You'll do the rest of them. So we'll go ahead and start with number 9. Mrs. Johnson teaches American history and wants to help her students do their best on their exams. She wanted to see which format of test students do better on. So she flipped a coin for each student in the class. If it landed heads up, they took a multiple choice test. If it landed tails up, they got to fill in the blank. And then afterwards, she was going to compare the average of the 2 test formats. So first of all, is this observational or experimental? Well, it's going to be experimental because she has 2 different groups. She's got the group who's going to do multiple choice, and she's got the group that's going to do fill in the blank. My variable of interest is not test format, it is test scores. As a teacher, as all good teachers, we care about students doing well. So this particular teacher, Mrs. Johnson, wants to increase test scores. So one of the methods she's going to try to increase test scores is maybe test format. So her theory is that, well, let's see if there's a difference in multiple choice versus fill in the blank to see who's going to do better. All right. So part C, if it's experimental, what were the treatments? The treatments are the test formats. So either multiple choice or fill in the blank. Okay. All right. Part D. Oh, I forgot to say how did they decide. So we want to make sure it's random because otherwise you could have bias. If she gave all the kids she liked multiple choice and then all the kids that she didn't like fill in the blank, well, that's bias. It's not a random sample of who got what. So how did she decide who got them? Randomly flipped a coin. As we've learned from probability, it's random. You can't force a coin to land one way or the other. Some of you might be goofy pants and claim that you have a way to do that, but it's random. Okay. So now, talking about advantages or disadvantages to the testing method. A lot of students here want to go, well, an advantage is that kids will do better on multiple choice. You don't know that. That's what you're trying to test. You want a testing method that's going to be unbiased and give you the best data so you can analyze if your hypothesis is actually true. So a possible advantage would be she flipped a coin to determine groups to remove any chance of bias in determining who would get each test format. Okay, so again, notice that I'm not saying an advantage is multiple choice is better. An advantage is that she removed bias by flipping a coin. So that way, one set of kids didn't get it and the other kids didn't. Okay. So let's talk about what some disadvantages could be. So this is where when you're coming up with your surveys, you want to think about what could go wrong and fix all of the things that could go wrong before you actually do the study. Because you don't want to do a study and have it all get screwed up and then have to redo it. No one wants that. So here are some disadvantages that I see with this particular method is that since you're doing it randomly, you could have students who typically do, students who all studied, like that actually put in the time and studied, got the multiple choice test. I should learn how to be able to take. So the problem with that is that you might get data that shows that multiple choice is the way to go and everybody should do multiple choice. But really, it wasn't the multiple choice that was better. It was the fact that those students all studied, right? So it was the studying that made the good test results, not the multiple choice test. So that's one possible issue. And you could fix that by saying, okay, like maybe at the top of the test, you write a little note about how many hours you studied. So that way, when you're analyzing data, you could remove that as a variable. Another issue is, since you are flipping a coin, the groups could be unbalanced. So you could have, of the 30 kids in class, you might have flipped a heads 26 times. So you could end up with 26 people taking a fill in the blank test and 4 not. And so having unbalanced groups is hard to compare. So that could be a possible disadvantage. Those are not the only ones. Those are just 2 of them. But the point is, I need you to see that it's about the testing design, not about, oh, I got fill in the blank and I'm bad at fill in the blank. No, that's what you're trying to test. Okay, so there's an example. You're going to do question 10 and 11 and 12 with those. Some of them are real bad. Like, which one was it? Oh, number 11 is a terrible design. I'm not even sure if you can come up with any real advantages in it, but that's kind of the point, is to see how bad that design would be, and it wouldn't give you any good data. All right, so then what you're going to do for question 13, pick one of the previous scenarios that was designed the worst and fix it so it would not suck. So pick one of these ones, either 11, 12, or 10. You could use 9 as well if you wanted to, and rewrite it so that way it would be a good way to collect data. Then what you're going to do, and this again will be different for each of you because you wrote your own things. Go back to your 2 examples from question 3, so the ones that you had to come up with right here, okay? And then you are going to, not as a group, at your house, unless you're quarantined with a sibling that's there at home with you, and find out a way to test each one. So for your observational example you came up with, which again, this could be the one that you're studying for your project anyway, how are you going to study it? Come up with some possible questions. Then look back to what you said for your experimental one and write out how you would study your experimental one. Okay, and that'll be through 16. So that's what you're working on now. Again, like I've said before, if you want to write through everything and you want me to check to see if you are getting the hang of it, if you have it right, or if you just have questions, screenshot it. You can either send me the screenshot and remind, or you can send me the screenshot through email, and I'll respond back to you either with a quick text back, yeah, you got it, or hey, let me clear some stuff up. I can send you a quick video back to explain what you're doing. But that's where we should be at. So by the end of the day today, which is the Tuesday the 17th, we should have through page 16 done in our packets. All right. Stay awesome, guys.